Final Fantasy VII is one of the best-selling and most highly regarded video games of all time. First released in 1997, Final Fantasy VII tells the story of Cloud Strife, who travels with the game's other protagonists to defeat Sephiroth. Sephiroth's ultimate goal is to destroy the planet with the magic spell Meteor, in order to harvest an energy called Lifestream. Lifestream contains the memories, knowledge, and experiences of the planet's inhabitants after they die, some of whom are able to remain sentient through the power of Lifestream. This concept of Lifestream is important in our discussion of Aerith's character and her theme music. Aerith, or Aeris in the original English translation, is a young flower girl who joins Cloud's party. She is the last of the Cetra clan, who had control over Lifestream. She begins to form a close bond with Cloud, who is usually distant towards others. Later in the game, Aerith travels alone to summon Holy, an ancient power that is the only thing strong enough to stop Sephiroth's meteor. Then, in one of the most iconic gaming moments of all time, Sephiroth drops down and kills Aerith. In death, she becomes a sentient part of Lifestream and is sometimes able to communicate with Cloud through his subconscious. With the rest of his party, Cloud struggles on, knowing he can only truly be with Aerith again when he reaches the afterlife himself. This death was unprecedented in gaming. Final Fantasy VII's original PlayStation release spanned 3 discs, necessary because the game was so big for its time. Aerith is killed at the end of Disc 1, meaning a character the player levels up and grows attached to as a main character is ripped away for a massive chunk of the game. Nobuo Uematsu, the composer of the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, and many other Final Fantasy game soundtracks, weaves the concepts of Aerith's unexpected death and her lingering presence through Lifestream into the theme music. Aerith's theme is in the key of D major, and we start off with a D major chord as expected. A melodic line begins in ascent, but after only 3 notes, is brought back down on top of an A minor chord. Right off the bat, Uematsu throws a bit of a curveball when compared to most music with a clear tonality. We would expect the A chord to be major in the key of D major, but here it is substituted with its parallel minor chord, A minor, as the descent begins on a C natural, which is the one note that is different between A major and A minor chords. This is very important when it comes to understanding the rest of the analysis. While the home, or tonic, chord of a tonal piece of music, here D major, is the strongest, the major 5 chord, which in the key of D major would be A major, is the second strongest. It's the chord you would expect to take part in closing out a piece of tonal music, or at least a section of it. The progression of 5 to 1 forms what we call a cadence in music. Notes from the 5 chord resolve to the notes of the 1 chord. And a sense of closure is achieved. Remember this point because the piece is striving towards A major plays an important role in this narrative. After this, the melody gives ascending another try, this time a bit more embellished, but again over a D major chord. But again it is struck down, and again this happens over an A minor chord. We have another repeat of this attempt and failure at ascending, over the same chords, but this time with a bit more rhythmic activity underneath. After this third A minor chord, however, we are brought to a B flat major chord, and after that to a G minor, 2 chords that don't diatonically belong in the key of D major. So far we've had all of this activity, but the only chord that we've heard that traditionally belongs in our home key of D major is, well, D major. During all of this, the melody is brought down to a D note, which is the lowest point the melody has reached so far. This little section comes to a close on that note in the melody over a D major chord. It's almost like the piece keeps trying to progress to somewhere else in the key, perhaps to its 5-chord A major, and progress upwards melodically, but it all just keeps getting bogged down by chords that are unexpected. This is easily relatable to Aerith's unexpected death, but the music not only reflects her character's narrative arc, but also her character's personality and nature. Aerith was a flower girl, and just as she took care of the flowers, she brought her sweet and nurturing temperament to the game's other protagonists, while also growing herself. She lived in the slums and led a lonely life, but by journeying with others, she developed strong bonds for the first time in a long time, especially with Cloud. One can relate the melody to a flower beginning to bloom but being cut down before realizing its full potential. That concept is just as relatable to Aerith herself. It's also worth noting that I'm not just making up this flower connection out of thin air. Check out another Final Fantasy VII track called Flowers Blooming in the Church, another track related to Aerith that uses the same melody we hear in this piece. Anyway, getting back to the music itself. From this lowest point in the melody where we left off, a new melodic ascent begins. Here, we actually get a decent sense of progression, both with the melodic ascent and the chordal progression. We finally get a few more chords that actually belong to D major diatonically. The melody reaches an octave above its lowest point, but then seems to falter a bit, and we progress down again. We then hit a new low melodically, with a low C sharp. Here, we actually get a counter melody. This is something that feels melodic, but doesn't quite feel like a continuation of the melody we've been hearing so far. It's kind of like two melodies coexisting. So at this point, our main melody is going through a few descending figures, and our counter melody is doing the same, but a bit slower and a bit higher. Once our main melody finally ascends again, the counter melody goes away, almost like the two melodies have met in the middle. This brings us to the next section of music, which is very much a climax. It's almost like a fanfare with powerful expression and clear rhythmic structure. A powerful descent goes to D major, and that same descent begins again but is interrupted by upward motion, before returning again in its original full descent. Like it gave a final push up and then resigned to being pulled down. And only here, near the very end of the piece, do we finally get our first A major chord. But it's weak. It's inverted, meaning the lowest note isn't an A, and it doesn't proceed to a D major chord, so we never actually get a traditional 5-1 cadence. A bit more of the fanfare material brings us back to our tonic D major chord, and following this is a short coda, with only a solo melodic line, and then we loop back to the very beginning. Narratively, it's almost like it gave everything it had to search for some resolution, but it never quite got there, and all that was left was the melodic line to bring us back to the beginning. There's something very poetic about this to me. Aerith is gone in one sense, but in a way, she survives as a part of Lifestream. Another way to read this piece is to take the focus away from Aerith herself and put it on a relationship with Cloud. Cloud spends the rest of the game, and even after in other media, feeling unsettled about both this heavy loss and about his place in the world. Aerith was like his rock, someone he could really connect with. I've lost loved ones, and I certainly know that with death, you don't really get a clear conclusion. You just get a bit better at living with the questions. So, with both of these interpretations, I don't think traditional musical closure would really make that much sense. I also think the piece does a great job of keeping that closure away without feeling all that dissonant or angry or depressing. The melodic line is kept clear throughout, and while it suffers a few narrative setbacks, it never feels out of character. A lot of the melody is stepwise, and the jumps stay away from dissonant intervals overall. So even though the chordal structure gets a little bit murky here and there, the melody retains its sweet song-like character, like an optimist facing adversity, which I think works perfectly in the context of the game. So that's what I think after having lived with this piece for a very long time. Now, do I think that composers always plan things like I just talked about in this analysis? Do I think Uematsu thought every one of these details through and purposefully implemented it all in the music? Not really. Maybe sometimes they do things like that, but I think a lot of this happens on a subconscious level, and even if it doesn't, the juxtaposition of music and game is enough to analyze in and of itself. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this analysis of mine, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.